to the fifth of the Stalin video lessons. We are looking today at the narrative, that's the story of the leadership struggle. Future lessons will look at the factors which explain why Stalin won, although that relies on an understanding of what happened and then referring to that. So this is primarily going to be looking at the story from 1923 up until 1929, where Stalin is dominant. And although I will allude to various key themes that should be used in the future essay, this is primarily going to be focused on the story rather than the analysis. So the leadership struggle is the fight over who becomes leader after Lenin's death. Now, Lenin had been in ill health from about 1920, ending with a stroke in 1922, where he is temporarily paralysed and unable to talk. And he has a second one in December of the same year, which again only makes his health worse. His doctor's advice is to try and recuperate by avoiding stressors such as stress, hard work, long hours, and other behaviours. And this means that he has to basically recuperate in a private retreat in a home on the outskirts of St. Petersburg, and therefore is less likely to be involved in day-to-day activity. He is still involved, and his opinion does matter, and he does intervene on certain debates and certain issues. And if his power is still the case, and his respect is still the case, that if his view is made known, generally the Party Congress and the Politburo and the Central Committee will respect that and either change their mind or adopt it to some extent. So he does still retain some control, but it is at a distance through messengers, and this will be a problem. And this means that his grip will somewhat loosen. So, for example, in the Socialist Revolutionary Party leadership trial, where Lenin ordered the arrest and trial of various members of the Socialist Revolutionary Party, which was then, although they were found guilty, they had their death sentences commuted on the orders of Trotsky and a couple of others who feared the repercussions of such an action, particularly in the countryside, shows that perhaps he wasn't listened to. However, although the Mensheviks were Stalin wanted them to be protected and less purged for a little longer, they were purged from the party in 1923. And Lenin increasingly voices and fears the fact that the party is becoming increasingly bureaucratic, i.e. people are getting positions and having control based on their ability to fill out forms and make friends with the right people and have a job which isn't probably necessary, but they have it because it's a job, as opposed to being there because they are true revolutionaries. And he increasingly fears that the revolution is being hijacked by people like Stalin, who are not necessarily intelligent and definitely not communist and pure communist, but in it for their own self-interest rather than the working classes. However, he is increasingly unable to do much about it because his ability to project what he wants by his own disability and inability to speak and communicate effectively due to a stroke, and the fact that Stalin, as General Secretary, one of his many roles, his job was to look after Lenin by letting people and by controlling his day-to-day affairs, including his housing, food, guards, and maids. And Stalin will use this position effectively, like he uses a lot of positions which seemingly give him no power, to control who is allowed to see him and what letters and information get in and out. And therefore, Stalin increasingly is able to control information that Lenin is given, and also control Lenin's ability to say bad things, particularly against stuff that Stalin is interested in. This role had been given to Stalin in the Politburo as almost an afterthought that was almost a patronising, you look after, you basically plays housekeeper. But it's a good example of how Stalin will use this role to limit damage to his reputation by limiting who can speak to Lenin and making sure, for example, as we shall see, there are lots of photos of Stalin's time, who obviously Stalin got free access to Lenin because he was in charge of who got access to Lenin, free access to Lenin, and made it look so to help encourage his image that he is Lenin's disciple, an idea we'll talk on later. But remember this for then. He is controlling what goes in, who goes in, what comes out, who is able to access it, and what increasingly Lenin's own thoughts are when transmitted to their own party. Kamenev, as mentioned in the previous lesson, takes control of the Sovnarkom and Politburo, not because he's powerful or important, but because he's seen as a safe pair of hands who won't try anything stupid. As Lenin gets increasingly towards his death, and he increasingly fears how the direction of the party, this becomes conflated with his dislike and hostility with Stalin. In part, this hostility is Lenin's suspicion that Stalin is manipulating information and controlling information. And a good example of this is Lenin is not comfortable giving his last will and testament to Stalin or anyone in his household, but gives it to his wife to smuggle out on her person, which shows that he clearly is aware to some extent of the control Stalin is having over him. But this also dislike and hostility to Stalin is based on ideological disagreements. Stalin wants to be able to increase trade, while Lenin doesn't want that because he sees it as a compromise of capitalism. And also Stalin is involved in something called the Georgian affair, where almost as a compensation, Stalin really cracks down brutally on the Georgian Communist Party, ordering the expulsions, death sentences, and various other punishments of party members from Georgia who are seen as not necessarily towing the party line. Lenin sees this as abuse of power and argues successfully against Stalin's brutality. And Stalin does not appreciate this, but obviously can't do anything about it because Lenin is ruled supreme. So Stalin is increasingly in Lenin's bad books towards the end of his life. And this is part of the reason that he writes his last will and testament, and he particularly singles out Stalin for being removed, and something I'll look at in a second. His last will and testament trashes everyone, attacks everyone, but particularly attacks Stalin. And he adds a postscript which seems to have been added a few weeks before his death, specifically calling out Stalin. And that seems to have been followed by as a result of an argument that Stalin had where he was very insulting to Lenin's wife, who about access to Lenin and Lenin's ability to communicate with others. And Stalin was incredibly rude, or allegedly incredibly rude, to Lenin's wife, and Lenin in response adds up his postscript. So what is the testament? The testament, which you can read here at length, is Lenin's will. Being a good communist, he does not have any property. Unlike a good communist, therefore, he doesn't have stuff to leave. What he does have is advice. Lenin is very aware that his words are very important to communism and very important to communists. And if he badmouths someone, that could make a big difference on their ability to project power in the future, because it means their opponents will be able to use that against them in internal party debates. Now, you can read and pause this, please, to read the details. This is a translated quote. But essentially, it is a systematic attack, not rude, but suggestion of the flaws in each of the leading members of the party. And at each stage, he says, Comrade Stalin is taking too much power, Trotsky is arrogant, but unable to really focus on what's needed. Kamenev is over are cowards, Bukharin is young and a bit too right-wing, and so on. That is the main bit of the testament. And you may be wondering, why has he decided to use part of his testament to attack everyone? The logic is this. Although Lenin was perfectly happy being a sole dictator of the party, he was unwilling for any one person to follow afterwards. He wants the Communist Party to be ruled as a group, as an egalitarian committee, i.e. how communism should be run in theory, rather than by one person. And so what he is doing by attacking everyone is trying to make clear that not a single person has the right to follow Lenin. Not a single person is Lenin's successor, or natural successor, person who's going to follow him. Now, he is least offensive about Trotsky, partly because he likes Trotsky, partly because Trotsky probably was the best. he is most offensive, particularly if you look at the postscript after the argument with the wife about Stalin. And it's clear that he's made a special enemy for Stalin, and he's suggesting that Stalin should be removed so completely. And so one of the key questions we're going to ask about is, why doesn't this finish Stalin? Well, the answer is fairly simple. By insulting everyone, particularly those in the Politburo and those who are very important, he is giving this document to a group of people he has insulted, and their supporters, to release the public on his death. So what they're going to do, as we shall see, is they're going to look at this and go, we don't want this to get out, it makes me look bad. And so they're all going to agree to hold it back until it's far too late to make any difference. Now, a common question is, how comes they did that, considering it could have got rid of Stalin then and there? Well, the answer is obvious. They don't think Stalin's a risk. They don't think Stalin is a threat. They don't care about Stalin. So yes, it might destroy Stalin's career, but Stalin's a moron, a grey blur. He's got no career anyway. So it is all loss. It is all a negative. Oh yes, we get to get rid of that guy in the corner who's taking notes. Fantastic, but now I look bad. And so what they're all going to do, in reality, despite Lenin's intent, which is to encourage collegial decision-making... Apologies for the break there, this video was interrupted. So to briefly summarise, the testament was intended to enable and encourage a egalitarian approach to management, where it will be ruled through committee rather than one man, but it ends up, as we shall see, getting repressed, and because A, it insults everyone, so no one really wants it to get out, and B, yes, it gets rid of Stalin, but he's not seen as a threat, so why would you take the personal hit just so the admin boy gets kicked out? So in March 1923, he has a huge third stroke, which basically leaves him entirely paralysed, particularly unable to speak, with a very slow recovery with the use of a wheelchair, and his wife dictating almost letter by letter exactly what he wants to say. He uses this time to slowly dictate the last will and testament and various other bits of information, but by this point his guards and his maids are all controlled by Stalin, and they strictly keep an eye on him and regulate what's being sold. As mentioned, the last will and testament has to be smuggled out by his wife as opposed to freely left out, with Lenin dying finally in January 1924 after falling into a coma related to his strokes. Now, Lenin did not believe in cults of personality. Did not believe that the revolution should be about one man. So what he insists is there shouldn't be no cult of personality and no state funeral. But he is dead, so there is both of those things. And we'll talk about that in more detail in a second. But before we do that, we need to move on to what we're about to watch. Because now Lenin is dead, with no clear successor designated, and a vague attempt by a man who is unable to really project his will anymore to create everyone working together in harmony and getting rid of Stalin, which fails, we have a power struggle. In theory, everyone's going to work together. And in theory, everyone's friends. But in reality, and they've got to pretend to be friends, the reality is this: although you need to make it look like that's what you want, you hate everyone else, or at least fear that if they come to power, they'll get rid of you. So in defense of your position, you need to start playing politics. Now, this struggle is not a democracy. It is not about getting the support of the people. This is about winning votes in the party congress and the central committee. This is therefore an ideological battle and a political battle. Ideologically, because in order to get rid of people, what you need to do is you need to win ideological arguments, have a vote on it, make that the party line, and if they disagree with that line afterwards, and remember only afterwards, you can get rid of them by accusing them of factionalism. And therefore this gives a veneer of respectability. It makes it look like that you're getting rid of Trotsky, not because you don't like Trotsky, but because he is being factional, and therefore allows you to remove opponents without seeming like you're being too political. However, although ideology is important to win the debate and make it look good, in reality it's a battle of your ability to command majorities in the party, particularly in the upper echelons of the party and the party congress and central committee. These are all decided by vote in the party congress or the central committee or the Politburo. If you are able to win votes or at least sway majorities of members of the committee or the congress on your side, you will win and you'll get rid of opponents one by one. But in the early few years, no one person has a majority. And therefore, the second skill you need to have is you need to be able to make alliances with whoever is the majority at any one point. And then shift those alliances when they need to be shifted. Because that way you can build alliances and always be on the right side. To win this, there are therefore very particular skills you need. One of them is not the ability to debate. They are the ability to be able to construct ideological positions which fit with the broad things Russians want to hear and is always in the centre somewhere. And your ability to be underestimated, make alliances, build up support base, use your base of power to most effectively in order to win. On all counts, Stalin has these skills. So, the power struggle will become about the ability to play at being ideological, but in reality win a political battle for control. So what are the key debates that will shape, ideologically at least, which is the lesser of the two, in the power struggle? Well, number one, there's a huge variation of what Lenin wanted. You can't be against Lenin. Being against Lenin will mean that it's very easy for the average rank and file to think you're bad. So instead, you have different people interpreting what Lenin wanted. Both sides claim to speak for Lenin. It's very bad if you are seen as not thinking what Lenin wanted, particularly after the cult of Lenin. So, both sides of any debate will always claim to be Leninist, and the other side are going against the word of Lenin. And Lenin said enough vague things and had changed his mind enough that you could always prove something of your side. So, the first debate is about industrialization. Whether we should, in order to stimulate the socialist stage of communism, in order to then move over to the communism, you should create a dictatorship of industry. What this means is increase state control of the means of production, the dictatorship of the proletariat, and industrialization of large swathes of Russia. That comes at a price, and that price is ending NEP. You can't have NEP in a dictatorship of proletariat because that's still capitalism. So that is to get rid of NEP, get control and fight the peasants if needed of the countryside, to get food, to ensure the workers of the increasingly large industrial areas, increasingly more many factories, are able to be fed. Now obviously as you move people from the countryside to the cities to work in factories, you have fewer farmers. And unless you increase the productivity and the effectiveness and the work rate of peasants, you are going to have a shortage of food. So the solution is not only to have a dictatorship of industry, but to increasingly control the countryside and farming, to increasingly control and basically take over the countryside, which has been owned by peasants who own their land privately, and basically run it like a factory without a roof, to quote Stalin eventually. That is the dictatorship of industry, and that is the left-wing position. The right-wing position is pro-NEP, not because NEP is perfect, but in line with what Lenin suggested out of the Kronstadt, to move towards socialism, we need to work slowly. If you end NEP too early, you'll have, again, another Kronstadt mutiny, another civil war, and socialism will be overturned, undermining in the longer term socialism. And this is very much the Bukharin right-wing position, that yes, NEP is bad, but it is something, a necessary evil, something to keep going until the Communist Party gets more secure, until the peasants are educated to like communism and therefore not argue against it, and therefore ensure that the NEP stays alive longer than it currently exists. Now, how long that is varies, and every communist argues that eventually it will go. So the debate is whether we end NEP now or we end it at a certain point in the future. And it's a balance between making communism happen quicker to avoiding a counter-revolution and therefore problems. The left wing, Trotsky, Kamenev, Zinoviev, will find themselves on obviously on the dictatorship of industry, and the right wing, Bukharin particularly, will find themselves at the other side, and the socialism at snail's pace. This will, and Stalin will find himself wherever is most politically convenient at any one point. The second debate is one of world revolution. As mentioned in the previous lesson on Trotsky, the left wing argues that revolution and communism needs to be exported, needs to spend lots of time and money being spread to other countries. The reason being is simple. The capitalist countries are threatened by communism existing and working, quote unquote, in Russia. And they will try and destroy it, as they already have in the Civil War with America, France and Britain invading Russia for a little bit. They will try and destroy it by invasion or subterfuge. So for as long as there are capitalist countries around the world, particularly in the powerful countries, Russia will never be safe. And this is about spending time, money and resources spreading the revolution. This is the permanent revolution of Trotsky. On the other side is what Stalin will come up with, which is socialism in one country. This is a patriotic idea designed to appeal to the average worker or peasant or common party member, as opposed to be a particularly logical position. This is the idea that we are Russians. We are strong, hardy people, stronger than most. And therefore, because we are that, we don't need to worry about invasion. Let them come at us. We'll beat them. And therefore, we should not focus our time and efforts on trying to spread communism abroad. Instead, we should focus on strengthening Russia from within, and that way they wouldn't even dare to attack us. This is obviously a very, very politically savvy position, but not one that necessarily makes a lot of sense. However, this will be a debate which, although not present at the start, will continue at the end. The last one is about what we're going to do about what is the greatest threat to the revolution. The left wing look at people like Stalin, particularly over time, from about 1926 onwards, and they argue that something called the bureaucratic degeneration is happening. The ideologically pure, brave communists of old are being replaced, but they're being replaced by bureaucrats. Read Stalin and his allies. People who are caring about their careers, who are very good at the paperwork, very good at behind the scenes, very good at politics, but not pure communists. You can see this is going to be a very Trotskyite position. And therefore the party is at risk not of counter-revolution, but being taken over and communism being subverted by a clique of bureaucrats who aren't very clever or ideological, but are in the positions of office-based power. This is actually a fairly accurate diagnosis, and it's probably true. The alternative is accusations of the right of Bonapartism. Napoleon Bonaparte, the French emperor, was initially a member of the Republican side in the French Revolution. Not a keen one, but a member. And he ended up seizing power from the French Revolution and the revolutionary forces and creating a dictatorship. And therefore, Bonapartism comes to define when a member of the revolutionary group, because of their own ego and wish to be in power above the interests of the masses, read Trotsky, tries to seek power and destroy the revolution. And this argues, therefore, the greatest threat is not the revolution. It's individuals who seek to try and seize power by being bigger than the revolution, bigger than the party, and trying to get power. This is a very clear attack on Trotsky and his Bonapartist, I follow me idea. These debates do not matter in substance. They are not important to in trying to persuade the masses. They only are important as a means in order to force debate a certain way, to add a veneer, as we mentioned, an image that we are making these decisions not because we are caring about our own power, but because we care about communism. It is also helpful for the couple of undecided or swing voters in a party congress to persuade them one way or the other. So this is both a branding exercise and a way to try and get uncommitted supporters of one side or the other. So we will look in the next lesson in the struggle itself. This is very much the background to what's going to happen. However, what you need to understand is that the struggle itself is not about ideas. It is about the ability to get votes. Now, ideas matter for that because they make you look like you're not being selfish, and they help encourage the image that you are ideologically pure and concerned about Lenin's image, and they also help persuade some swing individuals, some individuals who are non-committed to either group, who do exist, particularly in the early years. But in reality, this is a battle of party power, not ideas. If it was ideas, Trotsky would win. If it's the ability to manipulate ideas to appeal to a certain group who are already sympathetic of you because you give them jobs and you can get rid of them at any point, then Stalin wins. And this is why Stalin will win. Until next lesson, I will see you anon.